Hi everyone, welcome back to Whole Notes, a series of videos and interviews with musicians who talk about wellness, taking better care of yourself as a musician, better practice habits, and more. Today's episode features Chelsea Tanner. Chelsea is a flutist and wellness coach who shared some really unique perspectives on how our mindsets can shape not only how we see ourselves as musicians, but also our entire self-worth. In this episode, she shared her journey to achieving her wellness coach certification and also her stories as a classical flutist and how being a classical musician can be really hard when we're our own worst critic. So without further ado, let's get started. And I saw that you do like mindset coaching as well, which I think is really amazing. And that's a field that I want to learn more about and just kind of dive into a bit. Like, how did you get started with all of that? Like, as a flute player, how did you get into this world of like the mindset coaching? Like, what was your journey with that?
Well, so I love a podcast. That's my medium I consume probably the most. And I had just come across this coach's podcast, I think in 2019, and I started kind of applying it to my own life, and not necessarily all for flute stuff, but as soon as I applied it for other things, I was like, wait a second, everyone needs to know that like you can change how you feel. Like you don't have to like have all of these negative thoughts and believe them all. Like just little concepts that I was applying to my life that I thought, okay, this is really tangible, it's actionable. I'm not and I'm not just like journaling with no like path forward. So I think before I've been, trying things and um just wondering like why I don't feel better if I have just gotten the DMA or like why do I still question whether I can play the flute at that point, But those thoughts would run through my mind and it would make me feel extraordinarily insecure in, what I could do and what my potential could be. And I think that whenever we have those thoughts, it's so easy to believe them because no one tells us that they're not necessarily our own and things like that. So I found this work through a podcast, then that coaches uh basically like the where she got trained. I started listening to that podcast and I think I binged like 300 episodes of that podcast from like January to March of 2020, which I was like, well, I should have saved them a little. But it was and then I just became obsessed with how the mind works, and not for the outcome of playing well, but for the experience that we have as humans while we're playing, which I
Yes.
think is really, really different. Because a lot of people say, like, oh, like put emotion in it. It's like, yeah, music expresses emotions, but we still need to take care of our own, And so I
Exactly.
think, yeah, I think that that, and then I went through like a major rejection that year, and I be totally honest, laid me out. I was like, I need to find some way to deal with this, or else I'm not going to be able to be resilient in this field. And I think that resilience isn't just going back and taking another audition. I've done that dozens of times. It's literally like, oh, how do I treat myself after I fail so
Mm.
that I'm not just chasing the next thing, but I can be okay where I am at any point in time. So it sort of was born out of like a personal need to want to feel better myself. But then I saw its applicability to like performance anxiety, to uh, the practice room, our relationship with our instrument, and all of that stuff. So that's sort of a more long-winded answer, but that's how I got started in it. I got two certification trainings from different teachers and modalities and different things, one dealing more cognitively, one dealing more emotionally. I just, it's my favorite thing to talk about. So I'm so excited to talk about it with you.
Yeah, this is all so interesting to me. Like every bit of that story just like lit up a bulb in my head. Like this is so interesting to hear that like not only has this impacted you like personally, but you actually got like certifications and it sounds like the podcast you listened to, it wasn't like a music related podcast, right? Like the first podcast you listened to was just about life.
Hmm.
Right. So that's so important too. And I think something so important. I mean, you mentioned so many important things just in that one answer, but something that really like stuck with me is that concept of resilience. Like music is unlike any other career in that way. Like as I'm sure you've realized, in any desk job, you just do your job and eventually you'll get a raise or you'll get promoted and you just climb up the ladder, right? But in music, it's like you have to audition, you'll get rejected, maybe accepted, but maybe life gets in the way. You audition again, you get rejected. Like it's this constant roller coaster. So it's
Hmm.
like, how do you deal with that? And it's not something that's talked about in college. It's like, at least from what I've seen, like I'm a jazz trombonist. So
Hmm.
we don't talk about auditions all that often, but I know from my friends that are classical musicians, especially in the tuba and euphonium studio of Dr. Tyndall, they do auditions all the time and it's tough. Like you get rejected after rejection and you have to record the same excerpts and play them for months on end. And it's like,
Yeah.
how do you stick with that? It's like this constant cycle. Like that is just really interesting. How and what were those certifications that you got? I'm really curious about that.
One was uh, with Brooke Castillo, who's a pretty well-known coach. It was a 6 month certification, weekly calls, peer coaching, just like a ton of hours and hours of practice, and then supervised coaching by the instructors, asynchronous classes too. So it was just a lot of content, a lot of work, not only and that was mostly like cognitive things like dealing with your thoughts and managing your mind and being able to put kind of a structure to your mindset, which I found extraordinarily helpful because when you're swimming in feelings, you're like, get me out. And it was like a life raft. Like that's kind of how it felt a little bit, where I was like, oh, wait, okay. I can come up for air. I can kind of zoom out and look at these thoughts and how they're affecting my life in a very tangible way. And that a lot of tools came out of that, a lot of different concepts came out of that. And then I also had a certification with Simone Soul and Melissa Tiers. Simone Soul is she's coached on marketing for a long time, so I sort of joined her program because she also took Brooke Castillo's certification. And then she had been trained as a hypnotherapist by Melissa Tiers, who's a very well-known hypnotherapist. And them together, it was like this really cool way of exploring how to not just think different thoughts, but just to feel different feelings, and sort of access a better feeling experience through emotions and not just thoughts. So it's sort of this kind of like yin and yang, sort of like thoughts and emotions approach of um, being able to create emotional states we want to feel in an audition or performance or something like that. And like being able to conjure that and practice it. It's not necessarily just like, oh, I'm prepared, this should go well. Like
Right.
that to me is like, I'm probably not playing well.
Yeah.
But if I can access a feeling that feels that I know is going to serve me and I can feel for it, that's a really different tool. And to have the thoughts in place too, and to know what beliefs I hold, all of those things, kind of all together, I've found have been really beneficial, like to myself, to my clients, to all the, um, you know, I don't know, any stranger on the street that I will let me talk at them about this stuff, and I think finds it helpful. So yeah.
Yeah, that sounds so helpful for any kind of musician. Like I just had an audition last week
Mhm.
for my school's big bands, and it was a school audition, it wasn't super high pressure, but I was like my nerves were shot when I went into that room. Like I was musically prepared. Like that
Mm.
experience you mentioned before, you're musically prepared and then you walk into the room and you're in a completely different mindset, and you feel all this anxiety and it's like, am I gonna do well? And so yeah, that sounds like it was that those skills and techniques could be just so helpful for any genre of musician, to really bridge the gap between, the music and their mind. Like, has there been any like one big thing that has like been the most helpful to your clients? Is it like something related to that?
Mm.
Like, what's the biggest thing like your clients have said, like, oh, wow, I wish I knew this sooner?
Hmm. Wish I'd known this sooner.
Mhm.
Um, I think the I yeah, I think it's mostly like you don't have to believe everything you think,
Mm.
like question your own beliefs. Also that like I think the biggest thing that people both DM me on social media about and tell me about in like first sessions is like we get to the nugget of a lot of things is like they don't think they're good enough. You
Mhm.
know, like there's this general concept, and of course, why would we think we're good enough? We tell ourselves that we're wrong for like 4 hours a day in the practice room, and we critique ourselves, and that's kind of what we come up with, right? Our brain doesn't isn't wired for positivity. It's literally wired for negativity. So, of course, like the idea that we would think that we're amazing after not ever telling ourselves that is crazy, right? Like it's wild.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
like that doesn't add up, right? So I think that just the ideas around feeling good enough, like that we all have that sort of insecure feeling sometimes, feeling inadequate sometimes, you know, at every level. And I say that with all sincerity. I know I've definitely seen people who are big name artists feel insecure, and just want to just get it perfect because they think that as long as it's perfect, they can just like feel okay enough to like it's just I think I think the idea that our self-worth is kind of tied up sometimes in this stuff is very real because we're literally dedicating our lives to it. So I get it, right? But I think seeing themselves as a full human with a full range of emotions,
Yeah.
and as someone where, if the thought comes up that you're not good enough, what to do in that moment. And if you feel inadequate, what do you do? How do you change your beliefs? I feel like the idea that you can like be good enough and not be picked is
Mhm.
like a duality that no one talks about. Like people think, oh, well, if I was good enough, I would have won the audition, you know?
Right.
And it's like, well, no,
They don't
like,
always connect. Right.
yeah, I mean,
That is
I
such
like,
an important point. Yeah.
100 people go to a flute audition. One is picked, maybe.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
without hires these days, but one is picked. Does that mean the other people aren't good enough? It's like probably
Yeah.
not. It's just what the committee could agree on,
And it's
you know?
such a tough market when there's so few positions open in orchestras.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think it's a piece of like self-validation, either, and really exploring the concept of good enough. Like, what does that mean? Like, why do we, like, how does that fit into my life? How does it affect me? And how do I move through it and work with how I'm feeling? And still feel good at the end of the day. I know a lot of people feel resistant to saying like, oh yeah, I know I'm good enough even if they don't choose me, because they're like, well, what if I'm delusional? What if I'm not blah blah blah? But then it's building up that confidence of like, oh, I like what I play. I like how I play. And like I hope they like it too, but first and foremost, I'm good, you know? So it's like a
Right.
different, if it's a different approach than just like trying to get it right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's such a universal experience, both in music and for non-musicians. We have this tendency to place our value of ourselves based on what other people think of us.
Mhm.
Like for musicians, our value is based on did the committee pick us for that audition? And for people that are not musicians, it could be, was I picked for this promotion? Like,
Mhm.
did this person think that I was ready for this new job title or whatever it may be? Like, I think just, hearing, like really digesting what you're saying and connecting all that in my head, it's just so interesting that the experiences we have as musicians are so parallel to just being a person. And so much of what we think has nothing to do with our instrument at all. It's, are we confident? Do we feel that confidence in ourselves? Do we feel good about ourselves? Do we think we're good enough? And I teach a lot of young students, and a lot of them have this anxiety over, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, that wasn't perfect. Let me try again. And I'm like, it's not supposed to be perfect. We're
Yeah.
learning. That's why we're in a lesson to learn and to grow. And in a world where everything is advancing, right? Technology and everything's just rising to this new level, and everything that a lot of people are putting out on social media, it's all perfect and filters and editing and this and that. It's like, when can there be something that's not perfect? You know,
Mm.
it's like that message of, when is it okay to share something that's not perfect? Because especially a lot of the things that young people see, or even us adults, a lot of the things that we see are like these perfectly edited photos, videos, performances, even recordings. It's I when I do recordings in the studio, for like a jazz tune, or especially like the more contemporary pop scene, we do like sections of the song. Like, we don't do it in one take, we have to splice it to make it
Mhm.
perfect. So it's like, really makes you think about just how that affects people in general. It's really, really interesting thought.
Yeah, I mean, that reminds me too. One of the first things I go over when I have like a new client who's a musician is this concept of like thoughts and facts,
Mm.
right? Like, we have so many thoughts about like the sound waves we create in the room that we're in, and like
Yeah.
that's all they are, right? Like our experience of the sound waves we create is totally different than our teachers, than anyone else's, right? Because they're based on like every experience we've ever had. So any sort of circumstance we're in, we have an experience from ourselves, because of like how we were raised, how we've always thought, what we believe, like how we were socialized, like all of these different things. And then our
Mhm.
brain like spits out a thought. It's like, how crazy random is that? Yet we think we have this power to make people pick us, right? We think we have this power to, like, I don't know, influence people in some way. Or we think that if somehow the sound waves are good enough, whatever that means, whatever like invisible, like universal made up system we have in our head, like once we cross that threshold, then we'll feel good. But it's not that way, right? The sound waves literally just live in the air, and we have thoughts about them, and we can change those thoughts if we want to. But I think it's a process, and it's hard to just say that and be like, go, do it. So it does take some
It's
like,
definitely a process. Yeah.
but yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to mention that. So I think thinking of our playing as sound waves instead of this like thing that holds all this like heaviness, and worth, it's just, I love to think about it as a little bit lighter because then we can create space around it and it doesn't feel like this like such an important and heavy thing.
Right. It's not this end all be all of like, I have to play this one note perfectly because that is what I'm going to hear when even the top orchestra judges are going to have different ways of hearing the same notes based on their lived experiences too. And
Yeah, based on the parts that they play, based on the people they've sat next to before. Like, did they
right.
like how they played that? And are you playing similar to that? And if they didn't like that person as a person, they're like, oh, it reminds me of that person. Could be subconscious even. You know what I mean? Like, there's
Mhm.
so much nuance to it, but our brain loves to think in like black and white and like all or nothing, you know?
Exactly. And it's even tougher when in all forms of music, but I think even more so in the classical world that there's this thought of like, is it correct or incorrect? You know, right or wrong? Like, am I playing this excerpt exactly the way the judges want me to for this
Hmm.
audition? And
Hmm.
that duality can also create just this dissonance between like, you know, what is the music and what we're feeling about how we play.
Hmm.
So that is such a good point as well. Yeah, and it's something earlier you mentioned I think is so interesting is how our minds are just so tied to the negative.
Mm-hmm.
Like that what you mentioned earlier also really connects with what we just talked about. Have you seen Inside Out?
Yes, but I haven't seen the second one yet.
You have to see the second one. I think you're gonna really find it interesting the way that anxiety is portrayed. Because
Mm,
in the end, there's this portrayal of like an anxiety attack and
mhm,
anxiety telling Riley, you know, if I make the hockey team, I'll be good enough. And it
yeah.
reminded our conversation reminded me of that because that is so similar to how a lot of musicians feel. Like if I make this orchestra, I'll be good enough. If I make principal flute, I'll be good enough. It's like
Yep.
if I do this thing, I'll be good enough rather than I'm good enough regardless, right?
Right. Yeah. And that's a
And go
decision.
ahead.
Yeah, I think it's like it's so funny because it's an opinion too. And
Right.
rarely do we define it. Like what is good enough then? Like what happens when you get the thing? Because
Mhm.
I think that the like if I reach for that thing, but I'm saying like, okay, I'm not good enough yet, right? Because that's what it's implying. It's implying the lack of being good enough. If we say, oh, then I'll be good enough.
Right. That's the
And
desire.
right, if we have that desire and we are coming from a place of like, okay, I'm not good enough, so I have to practice. Like I feel like I think I'm not good enough. I feel inadequate, so I have to practice. And I'm hustling and I'm practicing and I'm doing this. And it probably feels bad when I'm practicing if I'm feeling inadequate while I do it, right? And so
Exactly.
if that's my
Cycle.
system, yeah, if that's my cycle, I'm practicing that cycle,
Yeah.
right? It's not like we get out of practicing. Like that's why I love coaching musicians. We get practice. Thoughts and feelings are habits. So if that's the program my brain is running, once I get the thing, the momentum doesn't slow down,
Uh,
right?
it doesn't
So I
reset
get the
your
thing, okay, I'm
emotions.
happy. Yeah, it's like, oh, that's just what I've practiced thinking. It's the same thing at, like if I didn't practice what I want to perform, I'm not performing it. Right?
Yeah.
Like if I didn't practice the way I want to perform, it's not magic. Like you're gonna practice you're performing how you practice. Same thing once you get the job.
Right.
Like it's like, did I practice thinking I was good enough? So now when I sit in this chair, when I do this job, I feel amazing and empowered. Or did I practice feeling inadequate and that's all my brain knows? And now I'm in this job and I feel like an imposter, you
Right.
know?
And that imposter syndrome is such a real thing, such a universal experience as well. And
Mhm.
yeah, like so much of what you said also just I think has to do with the fact that it another inside out analogy, like there's five emotions, only one of them is positive.
Yeah.
All the other emotions are negative. Fear, disgust, anger, sadness, they're all negative and they're all trying to control the mind. And that's like so true for musicians. It's they're scared of the audition. They're that the resentment they'll feel if they don't get the spot, the anxiety they feel when they're in the audition,
Mm,
feeling that imposter syndrome. And it's the goal really is for us to try to unlock that joyous, confident feeling within ourselves that, like, yes, we can do the audition, we are good enough. And it's so
yeah.
hard, but so necessary. Like,
Well, it's
yeah.
so interesting that you say that too. I think the part of it that is so beautiful, I've only seen the first film. Okay, I'm gonna see it this week, I promise. Now
Yeah.
you're like, you really want to see it. I haven't had a moment. I think I think it's not even just about, only focusing on joy, right? That's the first film.
Right.
It's about accepting all of the emotions. Like you're gonna feel all of the emotions
Exactly.
forever. Like
That's what
forever.
the second film focuses on. I think that's another reason why I think you'll love it so much.
Yeah.
It's about,
And so
yeah,
yeah, it's not even about like just focusing on joy. It's like, oh, how do I live with all of these emotions and have the full human experience without like pushing any one of them away and like really experiencing it? And how do I do that? How do I accept myself? Because it's like really accepting your full self and the full like human experience. So that's something I really focus on too, because if we try to shove away disappointment, are you kidding? Like you're getting rejected every couple months, like through big auditions,
exactly.
you're gonna feel disappointment. So I feel like that's one thing that isn't quite talked about enough, in my opinion, is like accepting the negative stuff too and embracing it and how to do that.
Yeah, and that took me so long to realize. Like, I've been seeing a therapist for almost 2 years. It took me, it's been a journey. Like, it's not something, like, I'm sure you feel the same way. Like, it's not something that just like happens magically overnight. Like, no.
Yeah, no, it takes some
It's a
time.
journey.
Yeah.
And like, I think, it's something that this journey of learning to accept ourselves and all of our emotions is something that, so many more musicians should really try to um to do. It can be so powerful and just add so many, just benefits, not to your musicianship, but also yourself as a person. And
Mhm.
the music and the mind are so connected, as we've mentioned before. I think that's really the overarching theme. I'm sure we could talk about this for hours. This is amazing.
Oh, I could talk literally for hours I talk to myself for hours about this. So,
Yeah. I would love to do more calls like this. I would love to do like some kind of live like discussion with the In the Shed community. It's full of jazz musicians, some students, some professionals, and I think something that I'm doing over there is bringing this project of, how can we have more resources and discussions about like mindfulness for musicians and bring it over to the jazz scene. So I would love to send you more information.
mhm.
This was already so great. I'm so happy that we got to talk about this. And I love talking about this, and I'm sure you do too.
Oh
It's
yeah, yeah.
really awesome. So yeah, it was so nice meeting you today. This was
Yeah,
wonderful.
you too. Thank you so much. I'm just like I so appreciate the work you're doing, honestly. And wait, how old are you? Can I ask?
I'm 20.
Oh my gosh. I'm so impressed and amazed. Like that's amazing. I didn't learn about any of this stuff until I was like 28. So, it's just like I went through all my schooling just believing every thought I thought and just in
Yeah.
survival mode. And I think most people have done that. So thank you so much for like bringing all of this, and like placing value in this at such a, early place in your career.
Exactly. That's really my mission, is to spread these just ideas and messages and experiences to musicians of all ages, because it's so important at any stage of the career to have these conversations about how we can be more understanding and kind to ourselves as musicians and people.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to give it a like, subscribe to see more videos like this, and be on the lookout for more upcoming episodes featuring professional jazz and classical musicians, music educators, music entrepreneurs, and more.